It began in the wide, silent space between two dying stars, a region so empty and forgotten that even light moved slowly there. Space dust floated like old memories, drifting without direction. The Zarian Empire controlled this region, and for thousands of years they believed no one would ever challenge their rule. Their ships patrolled the darkness like hungry predators, sharp and cold, metal giants with glowing red engines that cut through the void. Every species feared them. Every world bowed to them. Every story whispered their name with trembling voices. The Zarians were not just conquerors. They were the nightmare that civilizations prayed to avoid. They took planets without warning. They enforced silence wherever their flags landed. They erased languages, histories, and cultures as if they were dust. But today, something unusual, something tiny, something completely unexpected drifted into their territory. A small blue and silver ship. Human. Calm. Quiet. Drifting as if it didn't know or didn't care that it had entered one of the most dangerous regions in the galaxy. Zarian scanners detected it instantly. At first, the officers inside the Zarian command ship thought the reading was broken. The vessel was small, almost fragile-looking, with no active shields and no visible weapon ports. It wasn't trembling or signaling distress. It was just floating, slowly, peacefully, as if the galaxy wasn't filled with monsters like them. The Zarian commander, Lord Vraxner, stood tall on the bridge with his thick armored plates and glowing yellow eyes. His voice was deep like thunder, shaking the control room as he demanded updates. His soldiers scrambled, unsure how to classify this ship. It didn't match any empire. It didn't match any enemy. It didn't match any known weak species either. It was simply labeled, unknown, non-threatening, human. But the Zarians did not believe in neutral first contact. They believed in dominance. They surrounded the ship with 10 war cruisers, each one bigger than the Odyssey by miles. Their engines painted the darkness with red streaks, trapping the small ship inside a hostile cage. Then, the Zarian commander activated the communication system. The message echoed like a raw, unknown vessel. Power down. You have violated Zarian territory. You will surrender immediately. His voice was meant to break wills, crush hope, and force obedience. It had worked on hundreds of species. It had made entire planets kneel. But on board the Odyssey, something else happened. Something the Zarians had never, ever experienced. The humans laughed. Not polite laughter. Not nervous laughter. Full, uncontrollable laughter that filled the bridge of the Odyssey like wild sparks. The Zarians heard it over the comms. Rolling waves of human laughter mixing with gasps and choked giggles. The Zarians froze. They looked at each other. They had witnessed fear. They had witnessed tears. They had witnessed begging, pleading, screaming. But laughter? That was new. Commander Vraxner felt insults swell through his skin, his spikes rising with anger. He snarled at the audio feed, demanding clarity. His second-in-command replayed the sound. More laughter. Human laughter. Even louder. It made their empire's most feared officers shift uncomfortably. No one had ever treated them like a joke. Inside the Odyssey, the reason was something no Zarian could have predicted. The Zarian's voice filter, meant to sound terrifying, was stuck in a strange pitch that made every threat sound like a giant angry pigeon. Their words dragged awkwardly. Their growls vibrated like a cartoon villain. The humans stared at each other and then burst into laughter again. Did he just call us soft flesh worms? One crew member gasped, barely able to breathe through laughter. Why do they say Earth like that? You Earth, another added, holding his stomach. The human captain, Commander Hale, tried to regain control. He wiped tears from his eyes, trying not to crack another smile. Okay, everyone calm down, he said, voice trembling with suppressed laughter. But even he failed. The Zarian threats didn't feel dangerous. They felt like someone trying way too hard to be scary. And humans didn't fear things that tried too hard. But the Zarians didn't understand humor. Their culture had no concept of playful insults or dramatic exaggerations. To them, laughter was disrespect. To them, humor was weakness. To them, A species laughing in the face of the Empire was the greatest insult possible. Commander Vraxner slammed his blade-like hand on the console so hard the metal cracked under his strength. "How dare they mock us?" he roared. "Board their ship. Capture them. Make them kneel." Zarian soldiers moved instantly, preparing boarding pods. Their claws were sharp. Their armor thick. Their eyes glowed with hunger for dominance. They expected the humans to tremble when they saw Zarian warriors. They expected crying, begging, surrender. But they were about to experience something impossible. As the Zarian pods launched, the Odyssey's crew watched the screens. They saw 10 massive cruisers reposition. They saw the pods approaching like dark fireflies. The ship's AI calmly notified the crew, unidentified boarding units incoming. Estimated arrival, 1 minute. The humans looked at each other, not with fear, but with raised eyebrows and nervous chuckles. They had just finished laughing at the Zarians' dramatic voices, and now the Zarians were coming physically. Commander Hale stood in the center of the bridge, crossing his arms with a mixture of amazement and disbelief. "Well," he muttered, "they didn't take the joke well." His crew laughed again. The Zarian pods attached to the Odyssey with a heavy metallic impact. The ship shook lightly, but nothing alarming. The Zarian soldiers roared through the boarding tunnel, weapons raised, armor gleaming. Their commander shouted, "Prepare for resistance. They will fight. They always fight." But as soon as the hatch burst open, silence hit them like a punch. No alarms. No fear screams. No soldiers lined up. Humans stood on the other side with relaxed faces, wearing light uniforms, holding cups of coffee. One human waved awkwardly. Hey. Welcome aboard." Another human offered a granola bar to the first Zarian soldier. "You hungry?" The Zarians stared, frozen. Their training had not prepared them for snacks, or hospitality, or smiling faces. Commander Vraxner pushed forward, expecting to intimidate the humans with his massive size. Spikes along his shoulders, red eyes glowing, armor shining like polished bone. But the human captain didn't even move. He just stared with a confused, almost concerned expression. "Sir," Commander Hale said politely, "why were you yelling like that? We thought something was wrong with your voice filter." The Zarian commander bristled, his claws curling. How could these small, soft creatures not fear him? Why were they speaking with concern instead of terror? The humans' laughter echoed again. And something strange happened. The Zarian soldiers, trained to be emotionless weapons, felt something unfamiliar under their armor. Not anger. Not rage. Confusion. Deep, unsettled confusion. For thousands of years, intimidation had been enough. Now it wasn't working. They were used to fear. But humans weren't giving fear. Humans were giving curiosity. Vraxner growled, "Silence, human. You are in the presence of the Zarian Empire." The humans stared for a moment, and then chuckled again. It wasn't mocking. It was genuine amusement at how dramatic the Zarian tried to sound. Commander Hale stepped forward, trying to be polite. "Okay, maybe let's restart? Maybe use your normal voice. Not the scare-a-deep voice modulator. It's kind of funny." Vraxner didn't know what funny meant, but he understood insult. He roared again. "Arrest them all." Zarian soldiers charged. Humans didn't scream. They didn't run. They didn't fight. They stepped aside like people watching a parade go by. One Zarian stopped mid-run, confused. He expected chaos. Instead he got calmness. Another Zarian tried to intimidate a crew member by standing close, claws near her face. She simply blinked and asked, "Do you need water? You look dehydrated under all that armor." The Zarians had stormed ships for thousands of years. They had forced entire armies to kneel. But this felt different. Wrong. Strange. Their intimidation was not working. Their enemy wasn't afraid. Their empire had never faced a species who didn't fear them, not because they were brave, but because they simply didn't find the Zarians scary enough. Meanwhile, deep inside the Zarian flagship, Their communications team listened in disbelief as their soldiers reported confusion instead of victory. "Commander," a communications officer said timidly, "the humans are treating our warriors as guests." Vraxner's eyes widened with fury. "Guests! Guests!" His roar shook the entire bridge. He slammed a fist into the console again, cracking another piece of metal. His rage was so heavy it felt like a storm cloud forming inside him. But something else was happening outside the Zarian war circle. Something the Zarians hadn't noticed yet. Something that would change the entire power balance of the galaxy. Human ships, 5 massive Terran dreadnoughts, were silently uncloaking in the darkness, watching, waiting, protecting. The Zarians thought humans came with one small ship. They didn't know that humans were never alone. The galaxy was about to learn that the species who laughed in the face of the Zarian Empire wasn't weak. They were confident. They were prepared. They were dangerous in ways no empire had ever seen. And as the Zarians stormed the Odyssey, expecting fear but receiving humor, kindness, and confusion, something deeper awakened. A clash of cultures. A shock to an empire. A shift in the galaxy. And it all began with humans laughing in the face of the most feared empire in the universe. The Zarians didn't know it yet, but their world was about to change forever. The Zarian soldiers had trained their entire lives for war, for domination, for bending weaker species to their will. They were raised in metal halls drenched in shadows, taught that fear was the strongest weapon in the galaxy. Their boots were made to crush, their claws to tear, their voices to command. But as they stepped onto the Odyssey, all those lessons meant nothing. Their overwhelming presence, their glowing red armor, their sharpened claws, none of it frightened the humans. And that terrified the Zarians more than any weapon ever could. The hatch hissed open. Zarian soldiers roared their battle cries, shaking the corridor with their voices, expecting humans to scream. But instead, they were greeted with soft, confused faces and gentle smiles. One human officer named Reed blinked at them and asked, Are you guys okay? You sound like you're trying not to sneeze." A wave of stifled laughter rippled through the humans behind him. Even Commander Hale pressed his lips together, fighting the urge to laugh again. The Zarians didn't know what sarcasm was. They didn't understand humor. They only heard disrespect. A warrior named Zalga, tall and armored in dark crimson, stepped forward aggressively, his claws curling as he pointed at Reed. He shouted, "Silence, soft creature. The Zarian Empire does not tolerate." Reed cut him off by offering a bottle of cold water. "Hydrate, buddy. You sound angry-thirsty." Zalga froze. His claws hovered midair. No enemy had ever offered him water before a fight. He did not know what to do with the bottle. He looked at it as if it were a secret weapon. Behind him, Zarian soldiers stood stiff, confused, unsure whether they were being tricked or cared for. They weren't used to kindness. They weren't used to humanity. They were used to fear, and fear was nowhere to be found. Commander Hale finally stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't shout. He simply offered a handshake to Vraxner. "Welcome aboard the Odyssey," he said, tone warm but firm. "We didn't mean to offend you. We thought your voice filter was broken." Zarian Commander Vraxner stared at the hand like it was a foreign creature. He had never shaken hands. He had grabbed throats. He had held weapons. But a handshake? An offer of peace? He didn't know how to process that. His claws twitched nervously. The humans watching him didn't blink, didn't step back, didn't reach for weapons. Their trust unnerved him. He was a warrior built from fear. But these humans, they were something else entirely. Finally, he slapped away the hand, more out of panic than aggression. "You dare mock the Zarian Empire," he roared. But even then, the humans didn't flinch. A young engineer named Maya whispered to another crew member, "Why does he talk like he's introducing a wrestling match?" And the humans laughed again. Soft, embarrassed laughter that echoed painfully through the Zarian soldier's pride. Vraxner felt his anger growing hotter. No species had ever treated him this lightly. He demanded fear. But humans responded with curiosity and amusement. The Zarians tried intimidation again. Soldiers stomped forward in heavy steps, forming their usual conqueror formation. They slammed their weapons on the metal floor and growled deeply. But the humans just watched. Maya tilted her head and whispered, "Do they always breathe that loud?" Another human added, "Maybe that armor has ventilation issues." Laughter. Again. Uncontrollable. Human laughter bounced off the metal walls like tiny explosions. Zarian soldiers staggered mentally. Their greatest weapon, fear, was useless against this strange species. One Zarian warrior, smaller than the others, finally cracked under the pressure of confusion. Why are you laughing?" he asked softly, his voice unsteady. That question, simple, honest, made the hallway fall silent for a moment. Humans looked at each other. They realized the Zarians truly didn't understand. Reed stepped forward and tried explaining in the simplest way possible. "You came in too dramatic. Like, way too dramatic. It felt like you were trying to scare us using a villain voice. Humans don't take that seriously." The Zarians stared blankly. Reed sighed and tried again. "Humans react differently under stress. Sometimes we laugh instead of screaming." Still blank. Maya added, "Think of it like a weird human glitch." The Zarians understood glitches. They didn't understand emotions, but they understood malfunctions. So they assumed humans had malfunctioned. Commander Vraxner gripped his weapon tighter. He didn't want explanations. He wanted obedience. He wanted to regain control. So he shouted again, "All humans will kneel before the Zarian Empire." This was the moment the Zarians expected victory. The moment when other species would collapse in terror. The moment when soldiers would drop their weapons and beg. The moment when power shifted. But the humans didn't kneel. Not one. Instead, Commander Hale took a step closer, standing tall, steady, unshaken. His voice remained calm. "No," he said simply. That one word echoed louder than any Zarian roar. Vraxner's anger twisted into something else. Fear. Very small, very deep, but unmistakable. He stepped back without meaning to. Zarian soldiers noticed it. Humans noticed it. Power shifted, but not the way anyone expected. Suddenly, the Odyssey's AI announced gently, "Incoming transmission from Terran Command." The Zarians stiffened. Terran Command? The second-in-command looked panicked. "Commander, that means this is not their only ship." Vraxner swallowed, something tight forming in his throat. "What does that mean?" he snapped. But before anyone could answer, space outside the Odyssey rippled. The stars bent. Reality shimmered. And then, 5 enormous shadows emerged from the darkness. Terran dreadnoughts uncloaked. Massive, silent, ancient-looking warships with dark hulls and blue lights glowing like dying stars. Each one was bigger than the Zarian cruisers. And there were 5. Zarian soldiers felt their chests tighten. These were no soft flesh worms. These were monsters hiding in plain sight. Humanity had arrived not with fear, but with force. Quiet force. Confidence made of steel. On the bridge of the Zarian flagship, officers yelled in panic. "Unknown vessels. Unknown vessels." Weapons unmatched. Power levels exceeding Zarian cruisers by 700%. The Zarian general felt coldness spread down his spine. The humans weren't weak. They weren't confused. They weren't lost. They had walked into Zarian space with a single small ship, knowing their giant ships waited behind the curtain. Back on the Odyssey, Reed whispered, So, yeah, that's why we weren't scared." Maya added, "You surrounded one small ship. We surrounded you with 5 big ones." The Zarian soldiers looked at each other, fear finally blooming inside their armored chests. They had never misjudged a species so badly. Their empire, built on terror, had finally encountered a species that responded to fear with laughter and backed it with overwhelming power. Commander Hale stepped closer to Vraxner. "We don't want war," he said softly, "but we won't run either." Vraxner's eyes flickered. He had fought thousands of battles, but never one like this. Not against a calm enemy. Not against a fearless species. Not against humans. And for the first time in his life, Commander Vraxner didn't know what to say. The Zarian soldiers stood frozen inside the Odyssey's corridor, staring at the humans as if the universe itself had flipped upside down. They had prepared for screams, for terror, for chaos. Instead, they found calm faces, steady voices, and eyes that held no fear. And outside the ship, 5 giant Terran dreadnoughts floated silently in formation, their presence so overwhelming that even the space around them seemed to bend in respect. The Zarians had never been surrounded before. They were always the hunters, never the hunted. But now the hunters were trapped, and the prey was smiling. Commander Vraxner tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. His pride, his training, his entire worldview screamed at him to command, to roar, to dominate. But his instincts, the ones every conqueror ignores, whispered the truth. Humans were not intimidated. They were in control. Inside the Odyssey bridge, Commander Hale kept his expression calm, though his heart ached for the Zarian soldiers. He could see fear swelling in their eyes, replacing the arrogance they arrived with. They weren't used to being small. They weren't used to being powerless. And Hale didn't enjoy seeing them like that. He wanted understanding, not humiliation. But Vraxner didn't understand peace. He only understood power. So when Hale spoke softly, "We don't want conflict," Vraxner's claws tightened, interpreting kindness as weakness. He hissed, "You dare surround the Zarian Empire? You dare threaten us?" Hale didn't raise his voice. "No. You surrounded us first. We just showed you we're not alone." Those words hit the Zarians like a sharp wind. They had never considered that their intimidation might backfire. They had never imagined a species so comfortable in danger that they would laugh instead of tremble. One Zarian soldier stepped back, breathing unevenly. "Commander." "Their ships," Vraxner growled, "silence." But his own voice shook slightly, betraying a fear he didn't want his soldiers to see. His pride fought desperately against reality, but the truth pressed against him from all sides. The Zarian Empire had underestimated humanity. Meanwhile, the Odyssey's crew worked with gentle patience. Maya approached the Zarian nearest to her, noticing his trembling armor. "Hey, you're okay," she said softly. "We're not your enemies." The soldier stared at her as if she was speaking an alien language. No one had ever told him he was okay. No one had ever spoken to him like a person, not a weapon. His armor hid his expression, but something changed in the way he breathed. Slower, steadier, confused. Another human handed a Zarian a towel and a bottle of electrolytes. "Boarding pods are dehydrating," he explained kindly. The Zarian blinked his glowing red eyes, unsure whether to accept the gesture. He looked at Vraxner for permission, and when the commander didn't object, the soldier slowly reached for the bottle with his clawed hand. His armor hissed softly as he drank. The taste was strange but refreshing. It confused him even more. Commander Hale watched the interaction and felt something shift, something small but important. The Zarians weren't monsters. They were people who had only known one way to live. They had been shaped by fear, conditioned by cruelty, born into an empire that believed strength meant breaking others. Maybe humanity's laughter had cracked something in them, a tiny fracture in the armor of their mindset. Vraxner, however, wasn't ready to accept anything. His voice rumbled with frustration as he snapped, "Your kindness is manipulation. A trap." Hale shook his head gently. "No traps. You're guests. You came in anger. We're responding with peace." Vraxner's jaw clenched so hard his fangs scraped. His pride was bleeding. But something else was happening inside him too. A strange, uncomfortable feeling he had never felt before. Respect? Confusion? Maybe even shame? Suddenly, the ship's alert chimed softly. A hologram projection appeared beside Hale, showing the Terran dreadnoughts slowly shifting into a defensive formation. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. A quiet message to the Zarians that humans wouldn't be intimidated. Not with 10 cruisers, not with 1,000. Hale tapped the console and addressed the dreadnought commanders calmly. "Hold position. No aggressive action." Hearing this, the Zarians were stunned. Humanity held a position of strength, yet they refused to attack. In Zarian culture, power was always used immediately. Mercy didn't exist. But here humans stood, powerful, calm, relaxed, even after being boarded by an enemy empire. The contrast shook the Zarian soldiers more than weapons ever could. A younger Zarian soldier stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Commander, if they wanted war, we would already be dead." Vraxna spun on him, furious. "Do not question the Empire." But the soldier took another small step toward Hale, desperation inside him overpowering fear. "Why didn't you fire on us?" Hale met his gaze softly. "Because we don't attack first." The Zarians froze. That sentence felt impossible. Their empire attacked first every time. Their empire believed in striking before thinking. The idea of holding fire, by choice, was something only a powerful species could afford to do. Another Zarian whispered, "They held back, even though they could destroy us." That was the moment everything shifted. Zarian soldiers slowly lowered their weapons, not dropped, not surrendered, but lowered with uncertainty, with a heavy realization sitting on their shoulders. The humans didn't force them. They didn't take advantage of the shift. They just stood there, letting the Zarians choose their next move. Vraxna felt the shift in his soldiers and panicked. "Raise your weapons," he roared. No one moved. His command, once law, hung in the air, ignored. His soldiers stared at the humans, not with hatred, but with something else entirely. Curiosity, confusion, a strange sense of safety. They weren't used to calmness. They weren't used to being treated as people. They weren't used to an enemy who didn't want to break them. Vraxna shouted again. "I said, raise your..." His voice cracked mid-word, betraying his inner collapse. He looked at Hale with ferocious eyes. "What are you doing to them?" Hale stepped closer. "Nothing. You're seeing something new. When you're not feared, you don't know how to respond." Those words hit Vraxna like a blade. They cut deeper than any insult. His entire identity was built on being feared. If humans didn't fear him, who was he? His claws trembled. His breath grew uneven. His soldiers watched him with uncertain eyes. The Empire had never been challenged like this, not by strength, but by humanity. Just then, the Odyssey's lights dimmed and refocused on the large window as a Terran dreadnought drifted closer. It stopped only a few hundred meters away, massive, ancient, covered in thick plating and blue lights. Every Zarian felt their hearts freeze. They weren't looking at a warship. They were looking at a message. Commander Hale spoke softly but powerfully. "We came here peacefully. You responded with war. We still choose peace." Vraxna clenched his fists. "Why? Why laugh? Why ignore our power?" Hale held his gaze. "Because your threats didn't scare us. They didn't define you. They made us want to understand you." Those words broke something inside Vraxna. His armor suddenly felt too heavy. His breath too loud. His pride too sharp. No one had ever looked at him, not with fear, not with hatred, but with understanding. It made him feel vulnerable. It made him feel seen. And it terrified him. The Zarian soldiers slowly stepped back, not in retreat, but in realization. They had expected monsters. Instead, they had found humans. Strange, unpredictable, emotional, powerful, and disarmingly kind. And for the first time in the long, brutal history of the Zarian Empire, the soldiers felt the spark of something they had never felt toward another species. Respect. And the emotional storm inside Commander Vraxna was only beginning. The Zarian soldiers stood still, weapons lowered but not forgotten, their armor humming softly as the cold air inside the Odyssey brushed against their scales. They had never experienced anything like this. Humans, small, soft-looking, fragile compared to Zarian warriors, were standing in front of them without trembling, without bowing, without fear. And yet, even standing unarmed and relaxed, the humans held a strange power that the Zarians couldn't understand. It wasn't the dreadnoughts outside. It wasn't technology. It was something else, something that made the Zarians feel as if the universe had suddenly shifted away from their control. Commander Vraxner felt that shift most of all. He stared at the human captain with a mixture of disbelief and fury. His entire life had been built on the idea that power came from fear. But these humans responded to fear with jokes, with laughter, with calm eyes that didn't avoid his gaze. He didn't know how to fight that. He didn't know how to crush something that refused to see itself as weak. Vraxner felt like the ground under his feet was disappearing. Outside, the 5 Terran dreadnoughts remained in formation, silent but unbearably present. Their dark hulls glowed faintly with blue energy, and their size dwarfed even the Zarian cruisers. Every time the Zarian soldiers looked at them, they felt their pride chip away. They had thought themselves the apex of galactic strength. But these human warships felt ancient, powerful, and terrifying in a way they couldn't explain. It was not just size. Something about the ships felt awake, aware, almost watching. Inside the Odyssey, the air grew heavy with tension and unspoken emotion. Zarian soldiers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to retreat or stand their ground. A young Zarian warrior, barely out of training, whispered to the soldier beside him, Why don't they strike? Why don't they show anger?" His voice shook with genuine fear. "Because they don't need to," the soldier answered softly. "They already won." Those words traveled across the group like a quiet shockwave. Vraxner heard them. They stung him more deeply than any wound. He stepped forward, forcing confidence into his stance even though doubt gnawed at him from inside. "I demand an explanation," he roared. His voice reverberated through the corridor, but it didn't have the same weight anymore. It sounded desperate. It sounded like someone trying to keep a crown from slipping off his head. Commander Hale did not flinch. He walked forward slowly, deliberately, his boots clicking against the floor. His calmness was overwhelming, more intimidating than any shout. He stopped only a few steps away from Vraxner and met his burning yellow eyes. "You attacked us," Hale said quietly. "You surrounded a non-hostile ship. You boarded without cause. And we still stood here without raising a weapon." Vraxner's claws twitched. His breath grew shallow. Hale continued, "Why? Because we don't want violence. Because we believe the galaxy doesn't need more fear. And because your empire has mistaken fear for respect for too long." A deep silence followed. Vraxner felt exposed, as if Hale had reached straight into his chest and pulled the truth out for everyone to see. Zarian soldiers looked at their commander in a new light, not as a symbol of power but as someone caught between the crumbling pieces of an old world and the rising shadow of a new one. Still, Vraxner refused to accept defeat. His voice cracked as he said, "We are the Zarian Empire. We conquered hundreds of worlds. We do not bow. We do not bend." Hale nodded slowly. "Then why do your soldiers look at us with fear?" The question sliced through the moment like sharp glass. Zarian soldiers stiffened. Vraxner's jaw clenched. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew Hale was right. He could feel his soldiers' fear like a trembling in the air. Hale lowered his voice even more, but somehow it grew heavier. "You thought we laughed because we were mocking you. But we laughed because we saw something familiar. Something human." Vraxner blinked, confused. Hale continued gently, "We've seen bullies before. On Earth. People who believe the world should bow to them because they shout louder or stand taller. And we learned something throughout our history. Loudness doesn't make strength. Fear doesn't make respect. And power without peace is just destruction." The Zarian soldiers exchanged glances, the meaning settling into them like slow rain. No one had ever spoken to them this way. No one had ever seen them, not as monsters, not as enemies, but as people trapped in a system that taught them the wrong things. A small, trembling voice emerged from the back of the Zarian group. It was the youngest soldier, the one who had questioned everything since they boarded. "Captain Hale," he began hesitantly. "If you do not fear us, what do you fear?" The question surprised even Vraxner. Humans turned to the young warrior, curiosity flickering across their faces. Commander Hale inhaled slowly, then spoke softly. "We fear losing ourselves. We fear becoming monsters. We fear forgetting who we are." The corridor grew so silent that even the hum of the ship's engine felt distant. Hale continued, "We fear war, not because we can't win it, but because every battle takes something from us." One by one, Zarian soldiers lowered their heads. Their empire had never spoken of fear like this. Zarian culture saw fear as weakness, emotion as poison, softness as a flaw. But here stood a species more powerful than anything Zarians had encountered, and they spoke openly about emotion, about loss, about humanity. To the Zarian soldiers, this was impossible, unthinkable, transformative. Vraxner felt as if the floor beneath him was crumbling. He had lived his entire life believing emotions were for the weak. Yet here he stood, trembling, confused, overwhelmed by something he couldn't understand. He looked at Commander Hale and finally understood why the laughter had unsettled him so much. The laughter meant humans weren't afraid of him. But the kindness, the patience, the soft strength, that meant humans were something far more dangerous. They were unbreakable. His voice shook despite himself. You would spare us? Even after we attacked you?" Hale nodded once. "Yes. Because we don't punish mistakes with destruction. We fix them with understanding." Vraxner had no response. His claws lowered. His shoulders sagged. His armor felt heavy, like it carried centuries of wrong lessons. For the first time in Zarian history, the commander of a war party whispered a sentence no one thought possible. "Perhaps, we have been wrong about strength." And every Zarian soldier understood then, things would never go back to how they were. The galaxy had changed the moment humans laughed. The Zarian boarding team remained trapped in a moment they didn't know how to escape. The fear they had always forced onto others was now folding inward, pressing into their own chests. Their claws were ready. Their armor hummed with power. Their voices were trained to intimidate. But none of it worked, not on these humans who stood calmly, gently, almost with sympathy instead of fear. It was the first time the Zarians realized that strength didn't always come wrapped in armor or fire. Sometimes it came quietly, the way humans spoke, the way they breathed, the way they looked into Zarian eyes without a single tremble. The realization unsettled them more than any weapon ever could. Commander Vraxner felt his pulse echo through his veins, each beat heavier than the last. His entire identity had been built on the belief that fear shaped the galaxy. He had crushed rebellions with a single order. He had forced mighty species to kneel. But here, standing before humans who didn't bow and didn't break, he felt something terribly new, doubt. A small crack in his armor that grew larger with every passing second. He watched the humans move, speak, breathe. Their ease was unnatural to him. Their calmness felt like a different kind of weapon, one he wasn't trained to counter. Outside the Odyssey's windows, the 5 Terran dreadnoughts floated like ancient beasts made of metal and shadow. They didn't move aggressively. They didn't aim weapons. They didn't need to. Their presence alone whispered a truth the Zarians were terrified to accept. Humans were not prey. They were predators who chose peace. And that choice made them unpredictable in ways Zarians had never imagined. Inside the ship, the tension thickened. Zarian soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Their armor clinked softly, the sound sharp in the quiet corridor. A few Zarians exchanged glances, silent questions passing between them. Why weren't humans afraid? Why wasn't anyone shouting? Why did the humans look at them as if they weren't monsters? Maya stepped forward again with her gentle eyes, the ones that held no fear. "You don't have to growl," she said softly. "We're not fighting." Her voice was warm, calm, sincere. To the Zarians, it felt like someone placing a hand on a wound they never noticed they had. One Zarian warrior blinked slowly, his glowing eyes dimming. "Why do you speak softly to us?" he asked, confused. Maya shrugged lightly. "Because you seem stressed. Anyone would be after shouting that much." A small ripple of laughter escaped the human crew. It wasn't mocking this time. It was light, human, alive. And somehow it eased the tension instead of increasing it. Commander Vraxner's claws curled involuntarily. He hated that his soldiers listened to humans more than to him. He hated that the dreadnoughts outside felt like a silent judgment. He hated that humans stood there without a single weapon and still held control. His pride screamed at him to regain dominance. His training urged him to strike, to roar, to break something, anything, to remind the galaxy of Zarian power. But when he opened his mouth to shout, nothing came out. Only a shaky breath. Only silence. Only humiliation. Commander Hale stepped closer. He didn't look angry. He didn't look victorious. He looked compassionate. Almost like he understood the Zarian commander's inner battle. He kept his voice steady. Vraxna, your soldiers are scared. Vraxna's head jerked up, his eyes burning with offense. Zarians do not know fear, he snarled. But his voice didn't carry the weight it once did. Hale didn't argue. He only replied gently, then why are they trembling? Vraxna spun around, and for the first time, he saw it. The slight shake in their shoulders. The small quiver in their claws. The way their tails tightened. Zarians never trembled. Not in battle. Not in defeat. Not ever. But they trembled now. One soldier took a hesitant step toward Hale. His voice cracked through his helmet. You will not kill us. Hale shook his head immediately. No. We never planned to. The corridor filled with shock. Zarians had never heard an enemy say that. In Zarian culture, mercy didn't exist. Vraxna's throat tightened. He didn't understand how a species with dreadnoughts that could level entire star systems chose peace instead of annihilation. Then something unexpected happened. A small Zarian, the youngest in the group, took off his helmet slowly, revealing his reptilian face with glowing orange eyes full of confusion. His scales shimmered softly under the Odyssey lights. He looked barely out of adolescence, and his voice was fragile. Why did you laugh at us? He asked, not angry, just deeply, painfully confused. Hale softened. He crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to the Zarian's height to speak gently. Because you sounded dramatic to us. Humans laugh under stress. It doesn't mean we think you're weak. It means we didn't feel threatened. The young Zarian frowned. Is it normal for humans to laugh when they are scared? Maya nodded. Sometimes. It's our weird way of surviving. More confusion swirled through the Zarian ranks. Their galaxy was filled with species that cried, screamed, surrendered, or fought. But humans? Humans laughed. Humans smiled. Humans talked kindly to their enemies. No training manual had prepared them for this. Commander Hale stood up slowly, placing his hands behind his back. You should know something, he said softly. When you threatened us, when you surrounded us, when you boarded us, we chose to stay calm. His gaze traveled across the Zarian soldiers, meeting their eyes one by one. That is not weakness. That is discipline. The words settled into the corridor like a quiet storm. Zarians had always mistaken calmness for fear. But now they saw it for what it truly was. Control. Vraxna's pride cracked again. He felt something painful in his chest. A sensation he wasn't familiar with. Shame. He had brought his soldiers into a battle he couldn't win. Not physically. Not emotionally. These humans were not mocking them. They were teaching them something he had never wanted to learn. Vraxna finally spoke, but his voice lacked the thunder it once carried. What are humans? Hale smiled gently. We're complicated. Maya added with a laugh. Yeah, we're messy, but we try to be good. Zarian soldiers listened, absorbing every word like creatures hearing sunlight for the first time. Outside, one Terran dreadnought shifted slightly, its massive shadow gliding across the stars. The Zarians looked at it in awe and terror. It felt like a giant guardian watching over the fragile moment unfolding inside the Odyssey. And then, something truly unexpected happened. One Zarian soldier slowly lowered himself to one knee, not as surrender, but as a gesture of respect in Zarian culture. A second soldier followed. Then a third. Vraxna stared in shock as nearly half his squad lowered themselves before the humans, not because they were conquered, but because their beliefs had been shattered. They weren't bowing to human power. They were bowing to human calmness, to human restraint, to human kindness. Vraxner's throat tightened. He had never seen his soldiers kneel for anyone, not even for Zarian royalty. But now, faced with humans who feared nothing and offered everything, he understood something painful, something humbling. His empire wasn't the strongest force in the galaxy. The strongest force was the one thing he never respected: compassion. And as he felt the weight of that truth press into his bones, the great Zarian commander lowered his head too. The kneeling Zarian soldiers created a silence so deep that even the humming engines of the Odyssey seemed to pause. The moment felt unreal, like a scene torn from a history book that no one believed could ever happen. For thousands of years, Zarians had made others kneel. But today, for the first time in their empire's long, brutal history, they knelt before a species they couldn't understand. Not because humans broke them. Not because humans terrified them. But because humans showed them something they had never seen before: strength without cruelty. Commander Vraxner remained frozen as he watched his soldiers lower themselves, one by one, until their armored knees pressed against the Odyssey's metal floor. He felt his throat tighten, his heart pounding painfully inside his chest. He had always believed that Zarians kneeling meant defeat. But now it looked different. It wasn't shame. It wasn't fear. It was something far more powerful: respect. A kind of respect Vraxner could not command by force. A kind of respect he had never earned through fear. Behind him, the youngest Zarian soldier lifted his eyes toward Commander Hale, searching for something: an answer, a sign, a connection. Hale didn't speak. He didn't order anything. He simply stood still, letting the weight of the moment breathe. His silence felt like calm ocean waves washing over a battlefield soaked in rage. It wasn't dominance. It was understanding. And that understanding was more powerful than any weapon in the galaxy. Slowly, Vraxner felt the last piece of his pride break. He lowered himself, not quickly, not dramatically, but quietly, like someone finally accepting a truth he had run from all his life. His armored knee struck the floor with a heavy thud, echoing through the corridor. Zarian soldiers bowed their heads in shock. Their commander, Commander, was kneeling. Some felt their hearts twist. Some felt hope. Some felt fear. But all of them felt the world change. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't smirk. They didn't show superiority. Instead, the Odyssey crew grew emotional. Some eyes softened, some lips trembled, and Maya wiped a quiet tear from the corner of her eye. Not because the Zarians bowed, but because they understood what that bow meant. A lifetime of fear breaking. A lifetime of cruelty cracking. A lifetime of misunderstanding beginning to dissolve. Commander Hale stepped forward slowly, careful not to break the fragile moment. He reached a hand toward Vraxner, not to force him up, but to offer support. A gesture of peace. A gesture of equality. Vraxner stared at the human hand for a long, heavy moment. In that touch, he could feel everything the Zarian Empire had never taught him: trust, softness, patience, connection. With trembling claws, he finally placed his armored hand into Hale's. Hale didn't pull him up. He let Vraxner rise at his own pace. When the Zarian commander finally stood, he kept his gaze lowered for a moment, unable to meet Hale's eyes. "Humans," he said quietly, almost whispering, "you do not conquer. You do not break. You do not punish." His voice shook. "Then what do you want?" Hale didn't hesitate. "We want understanding," he said simply. "We want to explore without war. We want to meet species without destroying them. We want peace." Maya added softly, "and maybe friendship, eventually." The Zarians gasped under their helmets. Friendship? No one had ever offered them that. No one had ever seen beyond their armor. Vraxner felt something inside him slowly melt, a wall he had carried since childhood. He remembered harsh training rooms, commanders screaming that mercy was for the weak, that emotion was poison, that the galaxy only respected one language: fear. But now he stood face to face with a species more powerful than the Zarian Empire, and they did not speak fear. They spoke compassion. The young Zarian soldier stepped closer, his voice trembling but filled with courage. "Commander, maybe we have been wrong. Vraxner closed his eyes. For the first time, he didn't shut the thought out. Perhaps, he whispered, perhaps strength is more than forcing others to kneel. He looked at Hale, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see an enemy. He saw a teacher, a mirror, a doorway to a different future. Outside the windows, the Terran dreadnoughts slowly changed formation. Instead of surrounding the Zarian cruisers aggressively, they shifted into a protective stance, shielding the Odyssey and giving space to the Zarian fleet. It was a message: humans protect, not provoke. Zarian officers watching from their flagship felt their fear slowly fade into confusion, and then into awe. Inside the Odyssey, the emotional shift became almost physical. Zarian soldiers felt lighter. Humans felt deeper. It felt like two species who were never supposed to meet had finally found each other in a way that didn't involve war or surrender. It felt like the universe held its breath for this moment, waiting for someone, anyone, to choose peace in a galaxy tired of blood. Vraxner finally raised his eyes and met Hale's gaze. "Human," he said softly, "you have changed something in us." Hale placed a gentle hand on the Zarian's armored shoulder. "No," he replied. "You changed yourselves. We just opened the door." The corridor felt warm, despite the cold metal. Something powerful had formed, something neither species fully understood yet. But everyone could feel it. A bond. A shift. A beginning. The Zarians were no longer conquerors. They were students of humanity now, and the galaxy would never be the same. The moment the Zarian commander rose to his feet with Hale's help, a quiet transformation began to spread through the corridor like a warm pulse. It traveled through the metal walls, through the glowing lights, through every Zarian soldier who watched their leader finally lower his pride. For the first time in Zarian history, a commander stood not in anger, not in dominance, but in humility. And that humility, raw and trembling, felt heavier than any warship, stronger than any weapon, more powerful than any conquest. The Zarians expected the humans to celebrate, to mock them, to claim victory over their kneeling. But humans did none of that. They didn't smirk. They didn't gloat. They didn't speak with superiority. Instead, the Odyssey crew stepped back to give space, to show respect, to let the Zarians breathe. That small gesture broke something deeper inside them. Zarians were used to being treated like monsters. But humans treated them like people. Lost, confused, emotional people who were trying to understand a new truth. Commander Vraxner's chest rose and fell sharply as he tried to calm his breathing. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had never known. His claws twitched against the soft air of the Odyssey, unsure how to rest in a world without fear. The silence around him wasn't the silence of domination. It was the silence of understanding. He didn't know which one felt more terrifying. The youngest Zarian warrior stepped closer again. His voice trembled as he said, "Commander, what now?" That question echoed deeper than any command ever had. It wasn't about strategy. It wasn't about tactics. It was about identity. Who were they after this moment? Warriors? Conquerors? Or something new? Vraxner had no answer. His red eyes flickered with uncertainty. But then he looked out the window, where the Terran dreadnoughts floated like ancient guardians of the void. They didn't aim weapons. They didn't threaten. They simply existed, silent and massive, like a promise or a warning. And in that image, Vraxner finally understood something. Power wasn't about crushing others. It was about choosing not to. His voice, when it came, was low and cracked but steady. "We speak," he said, "not as conquerors, but as equals." Those words hit the Zarians with the force of a supernova. Some drew in sharp breaths. Others lowered their heads. A few clutched their weapons tightly, not out of aggression, but out of emotional overwhelm. Never in their lives had they heard that idea spoken aloud. Zarians didn't speak as equals. They demanded submission. They forced silence. But now, faced with a species who could destroy them but chose not to, Vraxner had no choice but to step into a world he had never been prepared for. Commander Hale nodded gently. "Equals is a good start." His voice carried a weight of kindness that Zarians weren't used to. Kindness that didn't ask for anything in return. Maya stepped forward and offered a small smile. Maybe we can show you who humans really are, she said softly. Not the ones you tried to intimidate. The real us. One Zarian soldier whispered, "Why would you show anything to us?" Maya shrugged. "Because you asked. And because maybe you need it." Zarians stared, stunned. Being offered kindness felt like being handed something forbidden, something dangerous, something warm. The Odyssey crew guided the Zarians to the observation deck, a wide, glass dome showing the stars in endless waves. The moment the Zarians stepped inside, their breath caught. They had traveled through star systems, conquered planets, claimed galaxies, but they had never stopped to look. Their empire saw space as territory, not beauty. But now, as the billions of distant suns reflected off the glass, something inside them softened, something that fear had buried for centuries. Vraxner stood still, his armor reflecting the swirling galaxies. "This," he whispered, almost to himself. "We never knew." Hale stood beside him, gazing at the stars with gentle eyes. "Beauty," he said. Vraxner nodded slowly. "Yes, beauty." He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply as if taking in the stars for the first time in his life. The younger Zarians moved closer to the glass, their claws tapping lightly against the floor, their glowing eyes shimmering with awe. They had never felt awe before. Awe was not taught in their empire. Awe was considered weakness. But right now, it didn't feel weak. It felt human. One young Zarian pointed to a blue star. "Is that one yours?" Maya shook her head with a gentle laugh. "No. Ours is much smaller." The Zarian blinked. "Smaller? But you," he gestured to the dreadnoughts. "Your ships are so big," Hale nodded. "Power doesn't come from the size of your star. It comes from how you use your heart." Zarians fell silent. That sentence lingered in their scales like warmth. For the first time in their history, Zarians felt emotions without shame. Curiosity, admiration, confusion, respect, and something deeper, hope. The galaxy no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place that could be shared. Commander Vraxner's voice softened. "We have lived wrong." Hale placed a hand gently on the commander's shoulder. "You lived how you were taught. Now you can choose differently." Vraxner swallowed, something burning behind his eyes. "And humanity, you choose kindness even when you do not have to." Hale smiled. "Because someone has to." The youngest Zarian lowered his head with overwhelming emotion. "Humanity does not laugh at us now." Maya shook her head. "No. Now we laugh together." Outside the window, the stars shimmered like they were witnessing history. The Zarian Empire's greatest warriors, standing in peace beside humans. No fear. No domination. Only possibility. And in that moment, the galaxy quietly shifted, because two species who should have been enemies were beginning something far more powerful. They were beginning to understand each other. The Zarians stood in the Odyssey's observation deck like children seeing daylight for the first time. Their armor, built for war, now seemed out of place among the soft glow of starlight. Their claws, once symbols of dominance, rested quietly at their sides. Their eyes, those fierce, burning Zarian eyes, reflected wonder instead of rage. The transformation felt unreal, like watching shadows slowly turn into living beings. The humans watched them with quiet smiles, their own hearts full. They had not expected this. They had not expected their laughter, their calmness, their honesty to reach so deeply into the souls of a species raised by cruelty. But it had. And now, the impossible was happening right in front of them. Commander Vraxner stood at the center of the deck, staring at the swirling galaxies with a heaviness in his chest that he didn't understand. All his life he had fought to make others kneel. He had fought to prove the Zarian Empire's strength. He had fought because fear was all he knew. But now, in this moment of stillness and stars, he realized something painful. He had never known peace. Not once. He had never seen beauty without conquering it. Never looked at a star without thinking of burning it. Never understood that silence could be gentle and not threatening. His throat tightened. He didn't know how to process this new world unfolding inside him. A soft voice broke the quiet. It was Maya, standing slightly behind him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked gently. Vraxner didn't turn at first. His voice came out rough, but not with anger, with emotion he didn't know how to speak. "I am thinking," he said slowly, "that the Zarian Empire taught us to survive, but never taught us how to live." Maya stepped closer, her eyes soft. "Maybe now you can learn." He finally turned to look at her, confusion burning in his eyes. "Learn what?" Maya smiled. "Everything you were never allowed to feel." Her words struck him harder than any bullet. He looked down at his clawed hands, the same hands that had destroyed worlds, taken lives, forced surrender. For the first time, he saw them not as weapons, but as burdens. "We were told emotions weaken us," he whispered. "We were told softness kills. We were told mercy destroys our empire." Hale spoke from across the room, his voice calm but certain. "It destroys empires built on fear, but it saves the ones built on hope." The Zarian soldiers inhaled sharply. Hope. That word had no place in their culture. It felt strange and foreign on their tongues. They didn't know how to hold it, or how to accept it, or how to believe in it. Yet for the first time in their lives, it didn't scare them. It warmed them. Suddenly, the ship's AI chimed softly, incoming transmission from Zarian flagship. The Zarians stiffened instantly. Their instincts snapped alive. Their empire was calling. Their generals. Their rulers. Their system of fear. Vraxner swallowed hard. He turned toward Hale. "They will demand victory reports," he said quietly. "They will expect our dominance." Hale nodded slowly. "Then you have a choice." Vraxner stared at him. "What choice?" Hale stepped forward, meeting the Zarian commander's eyes with unwavering calm. "You choose what story you send back. The old one, or the new one." Vraxner felt his heart drop. His claws curled. His tail tightened. The weight of 1,000 years of Zarian brutality pressed down on him. He knew what his empire expected: lies of victory, claims of human surrender, reports of conquest. If he sent anything else, it could mean punishment, exile, or execution. His soldiers watched him with tense breaths, knowing their fate hung on his decision. The humans stepped back, letting the moment belong to him. This was not their fight. It was his. A battle not of weapons, but of identity. The transmission activated. The hologram of a Zarian High General appeared, towering, armored, and cold. His voice boomed like crashing thunder. "Commander Vraxner, report your conquest. Report your domination of the soft species." Vraxner's soldiers looked at him in terror. Their empire didn't tolerate hesitation. Vraxner's claws trembled slightly. His throat tightened. He looked at the humans, Hale, Maya, Reed, standing calm, offering no orders, no persuasion, only trust. Then Vraxner turned to the High General. His voice, when it came, was steady but heavy with meaning. "General," he said slowly, "we did not conquer the humans." The High General snarled. "What? You will repeat that?" Vraxner inhaled deeply. "We did not conquer them," he said again, louder. The High General's eyes burned with rage. "So they escaped? They fought back? You destroyed them, I assume." Vraxner cut him off. "We did not destroy them." The High General leaned forward, his voice dripping with fury. "Then what did you do?" And here, in the quiet heart of a human ship, with his soldiers watching and the galaxy listening, Vraxner made a choice that would change his people forever. "We learned from them." The High General froze. His expression twisted with confusion, then shock, then fury. "You shame the Empire. You kneel to no one." Vraxner lifted his head, his voice trembling under the weight of truth. "We kneeled to understanding, not defeat." The words echoed like a star exploding. Zarian soldiers felt tears sting behind their helmets, tears they didn't know how to interpret. Tears their empire had trained them never to shed. The High General roared, "You have betrayed us." Vraxner's voice softened. No. I have seen strength greater than ours. And it was not built on fear. He stepped slightly in front of his soldiers, shielding them. If that is betrayal, then I accept my fate. Human hearts clenched at the sight. Hale stepped forward quietly, placing a hand on Vraxner's shoulder, not to protect him, but to stand beside him. The High General saw it and recoiled as if burned. You side with them. Vraxner nodded slowly. I side with truth. The transmission cut instantly. Silence fell like a shroud. Zarian soldiers looked at their commander with awe and trembling fear. He had spoken against the Empire. He had risked everything, his rank, his life, his people, because of a truth humans had shown him. Hale squeezed his shoulder gently. That took courage. Vraxner's voice shook. I do not know if it was courage. It felt like breaking free. Hale smiled softly. Sometimes those are the same thing. The young Zarian soldier stepped forward with tears glimmering in his orange eyes. Commander, we follow you. One by one, the Zarian soldiers stood behind Vraxner, not as warriors of a cruel empire, but as a new beginning waiting to be born. And in the silent heart of deep space, humanity and Zarians stood side by side, not as enemies, but as something far greater. The transmission ended, but the weight of Vraxner's words still hung in the air like the echo of a star collapsing. The Zarian commander stood breathless, knowing his life had just changed forever. His soldiers stared at him with wide, glowing eyes full of fear, pride, confusion, and something deeper, something new. They had watched their leader break the only rule their empire had ever cared about: never show weakness. But to them, it hadn't looked like weakness. It had looked like bravery. The kind of bravery their empire had never taught them. The Odyssey crew stood still, witnessing the moment quietly, almost reverently. They didn't speak. They didn't interrupt. They simply let the silence settle like soft dust around a broken history. Outside the observation deck, the Terran dreadnoughts shifted their glimmering hulls as if sensing the change. The stars around them blinked softly, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Deep inside the Zarian fleet, on their flagship, alarms blared as the High General prepared retaliation. Orders flew through their communications lines: capture Vraxner, force his fleet back into obedience, punish the traitors. Zarian officers panicked. Systems activated. War protocols engaged. But something unexpected happened. The Zarian cruisers, the ones surrounding Odyssey, did not move. They did not fire. They did not retreat. They remained still, unsure, shaken by what they had just witnessed from their commander. Vraxner saw the fear in his soldiers' eyes and stepped forward, placing a heavy claw on the youngest warrior's shoulder. Listen to me, he said, voice softer than any Zarian had ever heard from a commander. You are not traitors. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are free. The soldier trembled, his chest expanding in a shaky breath. Commander, the Empire will punish all of us. Vraxner nodded slowly. Then let them come. Let them see who we have become. Maya stepped forward, her voice gentle but steady. You don't have to face them alone. Not anymore. Zarians looked at her in shock. Commander Hale took one step nearer. The moment you chose understanding, he said softly, you became our allies. That word, allies, sent a shiver through the Zarian ranks. They weren't used to allies. They were used to slaves, subjects, and enemies. The idea of standing beside another species as equals felt unreal, dangerous, and exhilarating all at once. Outside, the Zarian flagship began powering its weapon systems. Bright red lights pulsed across its hull like veins of anger. The Zarian High General's voice echoed across all channels. Vraxner, you and your soldiers will return to the Empire at once. You will be stripped of rank and executed. Any Zarian who resists will die. Zarians recoiled at the command. Fear ran through them like lightning. They had always obeyed. They had always submitted to these kinds of threats. But now, something inside them refused to bow. The youngest warrior stepped forward, his voice shaking but firm. Commander, we stand with you. And with the humans. Others followed. One after another, Zarian soldiers moved behind Vraxna, forming a line of loyalty, a line of courage, a line of change. Vraxna felt his heart tremble. "You choose a dangerous path," he whispered. The soldiers nodded in unison. "We choose the right one." For a moment, Vraxna closed his eyes, letting the sensation wash over him. This acceptance, this unity, this courage, felt like the first breath after drowning for years. He turned to Hale, uncertain. "Your dreadnoughts, will they defend us?" Hale didn't answer with words. Instead, the nearest Terran dreadnought drifted forward, its massive frame blocking the Zarian flagship's line of fire. The movement was slow, controlled, deliberate, the motion of a creature who knew exactly how powerful it was. The Zarians gasped. The dreadnought cast a shadow over the entire observation deck, its blue lights glowing like cold fire. The message was clear. If the Zarian Empire wanted to punish Vraxna, they would have to go through humanity first. And no one went through humanity. The Zarian High General roared, "Move that human ship or we will destroy all of you." Commander Hale lifted his wrist communicator and spoke with chilling calm. "This is Terran Command," he said. "If you fire at any Zarian soldier under our protection, you start a war you will not survive." Silence. The High General froze. He knew the power difference. He knew the Zarian Empire had feared the Terran dreadnoughts for years from a distance, never daring to confront them. But now those war machines stood between him and the soldiers he wanted to punish. Vraxna breathed heavily, overwhelmed by the sight. "Humanity protects us? After all we have done?" Hale nodded. "Because you made a choice today that deserves protection." Vraxna felt heat sting behind his eyes. Zarians didn't cry, not ever. But he felt something like tears trying to form. The High General tried one last roar of authority. "Zarian soldiers, return immediately. That is an order." The Zarians looked at Vraxna, not the hologram, not the general, but their commander who had finally shown them truth, vulnerability, courage. And Vraxna said the words that would change Zarian history forever. "No, we are not yours anymore." The shockwave of that sentence pulsed across every Zarian ship, across every human, across the stars themselves. The Zarian cruisers cut communication with the Empire. One by one, they drifted closer to the human dreadnoughts, not as enemies, but under their protection. The High General screamed threats until the signal cut off completely. For a long moment, no one spoke. The Zarian soldiers stood in stunned silence, processing what they had just done, what they had just become. Then, slowly, beautifully, the youngest Zarian turned toward Hale. "What now?" Hale smiled softly. "Now," he said, "you live." Vraxna inhaled deeply, feeling something he hadn't felt since childhood, hope. "And our empire." Maya stepped beside Hale. "Maybe one day, they will learn too." Vraxna nodded, eyes glimmering. "If we survived this lesson, maybe they can too." The stars outside seemed to glow brighter, like the universe itself approved of the path they had chosen. Zarians stood tall. Humans stood with them. Two species, once enemies, now bound by something stronger than fear. Respect. Change. Humanity. And as the Odyssey began to move, escorted by the silently protective Terran dreadnoughts, Vraxna looked out at the stars and whispered, "The galaxy will laugh one day, not in fear, but in joy." And the humans smiled, because they knew he was right. The Empire had met humanity, and everything had changed forever.